Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pensky File. We're wrapping up the 20 board game ranking in my collection here. So we've gone through the first three videos, which were all the way down to number 6. So we're going to go from 5 to the very top of the list, number 1 in this video. And I think from the thumbnails, you'll probably see a couple of the games that are in this list right here. So without further ado, let's get to number 5. Number 5 on the list is a little game called Labyrinth. It's not really a little game, kind of a heavier war game. But this one is actually, now that I've been playing Fire in the Lake, this one might be dropping out of this higher position. But I've set it to where it is now, not including Fire in the Lake, which was an honorable mention in the previous videos. Let me just move that right there. Just keep it right in front of me. So Labyrinth is a predecessor to the Coin series. It's designed by the same guy. It does a lot of the same things. It's a card-driven war game. That you are the US versus the jihadists in the Middle East from like 2001, the war in Iraq and all that. So it is a card-driven game where the sides are asymmetric and they have different goals, different things they're trying to do, but it's based on sort of numerically controlling areas and having influence in different areas that you would want to control, and the win conditions are different for the different sides, but you're basically trying to have more of your influence than the other player. And you have a hand of cards that you play either for events or operations. So you can either do things on the cards, or you can use the cards' point values to do things out on the map, the battlefield, whatever. Now that I've been playing the Coin series games, it feels a little bit primitive. The two sides having separate sets of hands feels a little bit not as elegant as the Coin series, where everyone sees the cards that are coming up and everyone can do actions to benefit themselves with the knowledge of what's going to happen in the future. This is a little bit more in the vein of something like Twilight Struggle, which you haven't seen yet, but Twilight Struggle, I think, does it a little bit better, just because the Twilight Struggle deck is scripted, and this deck is not scripted. You just have a whole bunch of cards that you can go through, so which makes it a little bit more chaotic feeling. There's not as much of a narrative, if you want to call it that. It's also a lot more intricate than something like Twilight Struggle. It's not that I don't think this game is particularly difficult, but there's a lot of rule referencing, even not as much as Coin, although I'm more familiar with this one, so I might just be saying that. But there is a lot of rulebook checking. You have player aids that you always have to refer to when you want to figure out what you're trying to do. But I've had a lot of fun with this game. You can play it by yourself. There's a solitaire rule, same as the Coin series. There's AI. I always just play both sides. But the last thing I wanted to mention about Labyrinth, which is a game I highly recommend. It is number 5 here on my list. I do enjoy these kind of games. The one thing I wanted to say is that I love the artwork that the Volko Runke, I think is the designer's name, that he has in his game. I think this board is very pretty. It's the box art is not really all that great, but the board itself is very pretty. The Coin series does the same thing of being very pretty. I like the way it graphically looks. It's very attention grabbing without being sort of zany or anything like that. I don't know. That's what the map looks like. Essentially, that's a little hard to tell. But Google it. You can Google everything these days. But I love the way the game looks. I like the way it plays. I think it might be getting a little long in the tooth. And when I do this again next year, I'm sure this game won't be as high, just because of the evolution of Volko's designs. But that's it. Number 5 is Labyrinth. All right, number 4 out of the 20. Number 4, Lahav. Lahav is a Euro game about being a little ship master or something like that. You're trying to build a town, basically, and each turn, your little man moves along the row of things. You put out some supplies onto things called offers, like a fish offer, a meat offer, a grain offer, and things like that. Or you can have your one worker, it is a worker placement game, move into a building and do the action of that building. And at the end of the game, the person who has owned or who has built or bought the most buildings, which are worth victory points, and with the amount of money that they have, is the winner. So the person with the most money or the most wealth at the end of the game. It's a 2 to 5 player game. It plays best with 2 to 3. Probably, I would never play this game with 4 to 5. I think it takes too long. There's too many options, and I think the balancing of how the game works with 2 to 3 is a lot better. You don't have as many turns in a round in the higher level or higher player count games, which I think it doesn't really hit me all that well. I think the game's just too long to justify playing with 5 players. It's a long enough game with 3 players, but it's a very cool game that It's a Uwe Rosenberg. Is it Uwe? Something like that. But it's a Rosenberg game. And I think that it is wonderfully fantastic. It's a very simple mechanics. The mechanics are so easy to understand. But the thing is that as the game goes on, the amount of choices you have about what you want to do becomes vast. You have so many options that people who have difficult time thinking about what they want to do might actually want to stay away from it, because there is a lot of weighing out what you want to do, what's best for you in this round, how long do you have before you get to do something else. So there's a lot of mental math going on, figuring out how you're going to get the supplies that you need to get to the end of the round so that you can feed your people, because as you go through the rounds, you start having more and more food requirements to get through without paying loan or taking loans as punishment. So there's a lot of that sort of mental gymnastics. I think the strategy is really great. I think the way that the mechanics work, of how the buildings come out, is really clever. I think the way that the randomization of the items coming out in the offer is really great. I'm not too crazy about how the buildings work, which is the one you can buy buildings and they all do different things. You don't pay to use your own buildings, but anyone else can use your buildings. I feel like sometimes the punishment for using someone else's building is not intense enough. It's hard to say. You wouldn't want it to be crippling, but it does feel like you are. It does feel sometimes that you're just buying a building and people are taking advantage of it. You'll buy it and someone will use it immediately, which I don't know if that really sits well with me. I don't know how they would change it, but as it stands, I really enjoy this game. People I've played it with enjoy it. It is thinky. It is heavy. It's a mess. You need to buy little containers to keep all the chits in, because otherwise you just end up with a pile of little stamp-sized cardboard pieces all over the place. And you also need to be careful about the chips when you have them, because they're both double-sided. You can turn the typical Euro, you can turn resources into other resources, and they're done by flipping the chip over. So if you play with someone who constantly fiddles with their chips, it can sometimes be a little disastrous if they're not paying attention to what they're doing and they're just sort of playing with things and flipping them over and turning them into other things. The only other thing I wanted to say about this is I love this game, and I think one of the reasons I like it so much is that the iPad app is fantastic. And you can play this game a lot on the iPad, and it's one of those perfect iPad games, kind of. The game takes maybe 10% as long as it would if you were actually playing the game. It's quick, it's fast, it's not messy, you don't have to deal with the cleanup. But it gives you a good handle on how you'd actually want to play the game, because this is one of those games that you need to play it a couple times to figure out what you want to do. And the iPad app is hugely helpful in that regard. The game is long enough where you need you need quick plays, even if you don't finish the game, just to get through and sort of figure out not the mechanics, but like buying buildings and how the strategy works in that regard. So the iPad app is fantastic for that, but the game itself is also excellent. I love the artwork. I love the way the game looks. I love the way it lays out on the table. It's a little bit messy, but what are you going to do? And I love the overall strategy of it. So, although I'm terrible at this game, I don't understand why. So I love this game as much as any of them, but I am not particularly good at it. But give it a chance. Give it a chance. It's called Lahav. It is French, or the title is French at least. There you go. Give it a whirl. It's a lot of fun. Lahav, number 4. All right, closing in on the final 3 here. Want to take a guess? Yeah, you guessed it. It's Power Grid. The third. Number 3 on the list of top 20. So Power Grid right here. This guy. This is a sort of Euro. It's older. It must be at least a decade old right now. Game where you are, let me put that over there. You're trying to build a power grid network. It sounds really dry. You are trying to buy resources, build power plant, buy resources, buy power plants, and then build connection stations all across a map. So it looks very much like a Ticket to Ride map. And you sort of branch out, and there's different rules about what you can buy and how many power plants you can own and all that. And the resource management is very interesting. As you buy more resources, the supply goes down and the price goes up. So there's like a cool little market feature about supplies that everyone is buying actually end up costing more. So you have to balance out against what other people are doing. The power plants are bought via an auction sort of system where there's a round that comes up and all the plants are laid out and you buy them from the market, and the people who are bidding on them, or you can pass, and then you eventually end up with the last one and all that stuff. So it has a nice auction mechanic to it. It has a nice layered system of how many people can go into each city at a certain time as the game progresses. It calls them steps or whatever. I like Power Grid. It's 2 to 6 players. It's much better with higher player counts. There's something about it that's extremely appealing for whatever reason. It's very enjoyable. It has a lot of different aspects of modern gaming coming into it. Like it has the resource management part, it has the auction part. It has a lot of different sort of mechanics that games have been built around only with those mechanics. And this one does a nice job of combining everything together for you. And it's I don't know. There's something it's mathy, but not particularly mathy. And if you want to do well in this, you do have to pay attention to the numbers. Again, I don't really play games like that, but if you wanted to be really good at this game, you would have to pay a lot of attention to the numbers, sort of figuring out how much money you want to pay now or how much you want to keep for the next round where you could buy things and be in a different position. And the one last thing I would say that is really cool about this game is it has a cool player order mechanic. It's a little confusing at first, but how well you're doing in the game affects your position on the turn order. So there's a very serious rubber banding effect where the person, if you go out too far in the lead, everything in those rounds works against you. You're the last to buy properties, you're the last to buy resources, so it punishes you for being out first. So it's a stay with the group kind of mentality, seize your moments to take the lead when you need to, and then sort of play catch up. And then at the last round, the game ends when someone builds a certain number of cities depending on the players, and whoever can power the most cities at the end of that is the winner. So it's biding your time, waiting around, seizing the moment when you can, buying the right power plants when you can, and sort of building up funds. And it's very strategic, although you don't have to pay that much strategy to it, and you'll be okay because of the rubber banding. So if someone's terrible at this, they'll have an easier time and they don't feel like they're constantly getting beaten down, which is a really cool mechanic. I think more games should do it. A lot of games do at this point, but it's interesting and it's a lot of fun. The only bad things about this, I think the art is terrible for this game. It's coming out with a new version, but I think the new version actually looks terrible as well. They're not really nailing the style of this. This is by the same guy who did Friday, which was on an earlier video. He likes his green. I guess that's kind of his thing. And he likes the color green. Friedemann Friese, something like that. Freeze, something. Mr. Freeze. But I'm not crazy about the artwork. It's a little, the colors are a little drab. It's a very matte color. It looks sort of muddy on the board. The board is ugly and sort of confusing looking at first. There's a lot of numbers all over it. I feel like it could just be cleaner. I don't know if that's the aesthetic they were going for, but it's not a game that would catch my eye and be like, oh, that's an interesting looking game. It just looks it looks very, I don't know how to describe it. It looks very drab. It doesn't look exciting when you look at the board, which is upsetting because it is a fantastic game. And the only other bad thing that they're fixing in the new version as well is that it plays with paper money. And paper money is sort of tedious. I don't know if chips would be any better. People play with poker chips. That seems like it would be too much for me. I don't mind the paper money, but I would definitely prefer, even if they have, the modern Monopoly boards have the credit cards, which is kind of cool to keep track of. That would actually be cool. But in this game, money is hidden, so I don't know how well that would work. But you would definitely want something that, just something easier than paper money. Paper money feels cheap and flimsy. I don't know what it would be, but there has to be a solution. But anyway, don't let that stand in the way. Get Power Grid. It is awesome. What is that? Number three, Power Grid. All right, closing in here. Number 2 is Agricola. There she is. Agricola. This is an excellent, excellent Euro. It's by the same guy, Uwe Rosenberg, who did Lahav, which you just saw a couple minutes ago. It is about, you're a farmer family, and you're trying to build up your farm by the end of the game and have the most supplies, most vegetables, grain, cows, sheep, blah, blah, blah. So you're trying to build up a little farm in front of you. It's a Euro, it's worker placement. You have a set number of options that you can do. More options come exposed as the rounds go by. You put a worker, which is a family member, out on one of the actions. No one else can do the action for that round. And you're trying to build this very successful little family. And each round, at the end of the couple of turns, there's a harvest where you have to pay your family members, or not pay them, but you have to give them food, which is kind of a payment. And if you can't feed them, you get punished with points taken off. And at the end of the game, there's a whole complicated calculation to determine who the winner is, who the most points. But in general, you want to have the most variety of your farm. You want to have a little bit of everything because you get punished for not having things, and you want to have family members and an upgraded house. So it sounds simple, and it is simple. It's very easy worker placement, very easy to understand. It gets augmented by having cards, either occupations or minor improvements that you can use. You get them at the start of the game, and you can there are multiple ways to do this. Some people draft, some people give more cards than they're going to ever need the game, and you discard some. So there's a whole way to sort of build your starting actions about how you want the game to go using these cards, because the cards are what makes the game unique each turn. The card abilities sort of drive how you're going to proceed through the game. And the game is all about being efficient, and it's about maximizing efficiency. And which is different from Lahav, which is the way that this game designer has gone. The reason I like Agricola over Lahav is that I like the tense starting point of this game. Feels very constricted. Lahav is a game where you can actually do a lot of actions, and you never really feel that you're sort of stuck. There's always something you can do in Lahav. There's always something helpful, and it's very wide open, and you can. And it goes into what I was talking about, the building problem, where the buildings are. I don't like that people can use my buildings but that's the sense of the openness of the game, that it really doesn't hinder you from doing anything. Agricola is really different. Agricola is all about making the best of a bad situation, and a lot of people don't like it because of that. A lot of people feel that it is too punishing. The game ends too quickly. That it is too hard, and you have to focus too much on doing minimal amounts of gain, and you can't really get to the point that you want it to be. And I think that's missing the point, because I think the game does feel like it ends quickly, but that's because the game is not designed for you to be able to do a perfect job. You're not supposed to be able to get your farm up and running. That's the whole point. You're supposed to do as good of a job as you can in the limited time that they have with your limited means. And the person who does it the best by the end of the round, or the end of the game, is the winner. And I think that's really clever, and I think that's I like the constraint of that game as compared to like Lahav. Even though I think Lahav is a great game, I like the tenseness of this one. I like how quick it plays. I like the way it looks. I like the various aspects of figuring out how you're going to get around a situation. I like the tenseness of having to feed and actually being punishing at certain points. I just think it's a much more interesting game when you have constraints on yourself rather than you can just do whatever you want in an open sandbox. So that's it. Agricola. This is very high up on Board Game Geek. There's a reason for it. It's one of my favorites, and it's also on the iPad. So the iPad, learning it on the iPad might be a little bit more difficult. That might actually be easier to learn on the game board. But the iPad is great for sort of figuring out strategy, same as Lahav. And it's great for just getting plays in real quick or when other people aren't around. So I'd recommend it. But Agricola, I think this is an excellent, excellent game. I'd highly recommend checking it out. It is, and I'll get the expansion at some point. I haven't had a need for it yet. I'm still happy with this, but there is an expansion. It's supposed to be good. But in the meantime, Agricola, awesome. Number 2. All right, wrapping up the list. Number 1, I mentioned it earlier, so if you've been paying attention, you'll obviously know what's here. Did a Let's Play series of this game. It's been pretty well received, if you want to check that out. Not to toot my own horn, but we were happy with it, the way it came out. Twilight Struggle. There it is. So you can click the link. I'll put one in for the Let's Play if you haven't seen it. But this is the number 1 game on Board Game Geek right now. And it might be a little bit cliche of me to say, and it might be a little bit of a letdown, I guess, if you're watching this, to realize that this is my number 1. But I do think there's a reason that this game is the number 1 game on Board Game Geek. I think it's a... how do I want to say this? It's a game that, when people talk about theme in board games, I think it's generally overrated. And I don't really put a lot of stock into people having theme, or saying that they want theme in games. I know the Dice Tower is huge on theme. I don't really understand it. When I look at a game, I see the mechanics of it, and the theme is just something that's put on top to allow for a narrative. And a lot of games can switch themes, and you wouldn't notice a difference in how the game is played. Twilight Struggle, and I think war games in general, are the few games that actually... there are a lot of games that do it, but they do it most cleverly, I think, or the most sublimely, I guess would be a way to say it. They are the perfect marriage of theme and mechanics. So this is a Cold War game. It's a 2-player game. 1 player is the Soviet Union, 1 player is the US. You have a deck of cards that you go through. same as Labyrinth, where there are cards that are for your opponent and for you, and they have operations point, or they have events on them. So you're given a hand of cards at each start of each round, each turn, and you play them, and you go through your hand of cards, and when you play a enemy event, the enemy event happens. When you play your event or your ops, you can do things on the board. So there's this great hand management aspect to this game where you have good cards or things you want to do, but it's an enemy event, and doing it will cause the enemy event to happen. So you have to sort of figure out ways to mitigate all the damage that's being done, at the same time getting things done that you want to have actually be accomplished. And the rest of the game is it's the map of the world, and you're putting down influence points into different countries, trying to control different regions, which are basically the continents. And you get scoring points when cards come out that are called scoring cards, and you score based on who has more influence in those regions, essentially. It's deeper than that, but that's the base point. You want to have more influence in a region, and you get more points for it. And so the game is this beautiful marriage between theme and mechanics. The mechanics make sense because placing a number is what these countries were trying to do at the time, trying to sort of influence other countries and sway them towards them. The events are fantastic because doing something causes a counter reaction, which is very, apropos of the Cold War with the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything, for example. And the scoring cards are also interesting because scoring cards are hidden, so you don't know what's happening. So when your opponent starts doing something in a region, you'll start doing something because you don't want them to outscore you. So it has this great sort of Cold War mentality of, why are they doing that? I think we should be doing that as well, which is really cool. It would be the only time where I talk about theme in conjunction with the mechanics of a game, or these kind of games. And the mechanics are sound enough as they are. The mechanics are great. If it wasn't the Cold War, it would be something else that would, if use these mechanics, it would be an excellent game. In addition to that, it's just the theme really puts it over the top. I think it's perfect. I love the way that the card deck is organized and set up. It's sort of scripted, but you have a little bit of freedom to move around so that events go historically in order, but you have a difference of how the cards come out, which cards get used, and the reshuffle, the strategy about when the cards get reshuffled, so how you should play things. The strategy, there's a little bit of luck, a tiny bit with the dice rolling and realignment rolls. Not enough to really determine the game, but enough to, sorry, the thing is going to die, but enough to get through it. And I think that it is fantastic. I would highly recommend this. There's a reason this game is #1 on Board Game Geek. Twilight Struggle, my favorite. So cool. Thank you guys for watching. This has been my board game collection.